On behalf of the ILA board, the International Light Association board, and the president, Thelma van der Werf, we are very happy to welcome you for the inaugural ILA Talkshow. The International Light Association is an international body of volunteers and practitioners that focus on utilizing light, sound, and color for health and well-being. Today, we have a fantastic lineup of speakers for our inaugural show. The first guest is Anadi Martel of Sensora Sensatech fame. He's also the author of a benchmark book in a profession called Light Therapies, and a past president of the ILA for 7 years, from 2011 to 2018. And we're very thankful for his service to in getting the ILA to the point where it is now. The second speaker is Dr. Jacob Liberman. He will come. He will be live at about 12:45. And the format that we are following, I will do a bigger introduction to him when he comes on. The format we are following is that our guest would share their work on the topic that's been highlighted in the newsletters and in the mailers that you got. And then at the end, we would have a Q&A, a question and answer session. After that, we will go to Jacob, and again, he would speak for about 25 to 30 minutes, and then we would have a Q&A session at the end. You're welcome to pose the questions in the chat, we will try to get to all of them before we close out at about 1:30 p.m. New York time. So please join me in welcoming Anadi Martel. Anadi, thank you for taking the time. We are very happy to host you, and we look forward to your talk on color therapy. So over to you, Anadi.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be invited. It's wonderful to see all of you, even if it's at a distance and in tiny little pictures, but it's wonderful to connect in this way. So great that you've taken this initiative to organize these talk shows.
I would love to pose a question before you start the slides. Sure. Right? You have done such groundbreaking work on, how you develop the Sensora and the Sensatech, right? It's obviously connected all to color therapy. So maybe a good idea to just give us a little background on how you got to this point. I know you're a physicist, you've worked on it for 30 years, and you have had great international exposure set. So a little bit of background on who you are and how your journey has been before the slide, so we can know a little more about you.
Okay, well, as you mentioned, my training is as a physicist in Canada here. And but from an early age, I was interested in meditation. So I ended up spending a few years in India exploring meditation and discovering the whole dimension of consciousness, which was a revelation for me. Well, ever since then, I've been trying to bridge these two dimensions of science and the consciousness. And it's an infinite field of work. It's ongoing, and we need a lot of people on the planet to explore that merging, because it's really key to our future.
And you started Sensora you started work on it with Ma Premo, your partner, in the 90s, right? Almost 30 years ago.
In the 80s.
In the 80s, no kidding.
Yes, that's an old story. Yeah, it's been ongoing all the while, and I keep on refining the technology, exploring, bringing up new generations of ways to work with light. So it's not ended yet.
That's great. I hope it
So
continues many more decades because your contributions have been stellar. So for those of you who know Anadi, I have met him before, you know his contributions to the ILA. But for me personally, the reason that I became interested in the ILA is because I was speaking at a conference that he was speaking at, and I saw his presentation and I was blown away. You know, I was like, wait, there's a group that does this already, and I don't have to like keep grappling for information. And then, of course, we were in touch, and then I attended the future conferences, and here we are 6 years later, um, you know hosting you to share your knowledge and wisdom about what you've been doing for over 3 decades. So stage is yours, Nadi. Again, welcome, and thank you for being here.
great. Well, the topic that I proposed today was, I call it the scientific basis of color therapy, which is a bit ambitious. Maybe we can start with the slides, Justin. We all know that there is a renaissance of light medicine since the past 20 years or so. And light medicine has moved on from being a pariah, a quack thing, to an officially recognized discipline in that time, in this past 20 years. And so there is now a body of scientific evidence for light medicine that's constantly growing. And of course, for all of us who've been working with light since long before that, this is a very wonderful development. It kind of validates much of what we've been saying all along. But there is still a bit of confusion I often see regarding this, because you might want to use this scientific evidence that we have for light medicine and apply it directly to what we do and say, look, here's the proof that it works, it's all established and so on. And what I want to clarify maybe today is which parts actually are scientifically validated by this revolution that's happening now, and which parts are still beyond it. Because it's very important in our work to have that clarity. And so that's what I want to try to go through today. The scientific discoveries that are really moving light medicine ahead now are, I mentioned them here, photobiomodulation, the cellular effects of light on to accelerate cellular metabolism. And that's a very powerful mechanism that has great, deep ramifications. And the second big topic being explored by light medicine is the non-visual optic pathway and the whole topic of circadian lighting, and how light is key in maintaining our inner balance, our inner rhythms, and our hormonal balance. So there's a lot of exploration going on these things. Justin, you want to go to the next slide? So let's look at how this light medicine uses colors, because we're talking about color therapy here, mostly. And of course, there is light and colors are completely merged. They go together. You don't have one without the other. So let's look at how this use of colors is scientifically validated, which part of it is really within the domain of light medicine. So we just go through the colors, the main colors one by one, and see how they're used. Of course, red is the color of photobiomodulation. It's the part of the spectrum which is most active for this mitochondrial ATP stimulation. So it's being used in medicine now a lot. If you look on the web, you have an infinite number of products working with this red light. So it's a key to the light medicine process now. The next slide. Yellow is starting to be used in skincare. You see it in beauty salons and so in many commercial applications. to help with skin tone and wrinkles and so on. Next slide. Green is an interesting case. There's some studies going on at the University of Arizona showing how green light is very effective to treat chronic pain and migraine also. And actually, the researchers doing that work have a bit of problem to explain these effects of green within the framework of light medicine, because it is kind of encroaching into color therapy, and they're not so familiar with it. They don't have as much ground to stand on with this. So it's interesting to see how, because the research is happening within an academic framework, university, it brings validity to the use of colors in this way, whereas they still don't have a theoretical framework to kind of understand properly what's going on here. They can just see the effects and see what that it's really doing something. We move on to the next color. We have blue. Blue is a key color. There's a lot of talk about it in light medicine. It was originally used to treat neonatal jaundice since decades because it converts bilirubin in the blood of infants. And more recently, all the talk about the non-visual optic effects, the influence on the hormonal balance, the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the hypothalamus, and this is all centered around the blue part of the spectrum. So a key color there that's very important in our modern world. The next slide. Violet, we're starting to see some uses of violet, mostly for sterilization, and because violet photons have the most energy, they have the most impact in terms of oxidation of cells. And so you're starting to see various applications now using violet light. And even as part of lighting, they're talking of integrating violet into regular luminaires to kind of sterilize on a continuous basis clinical settings. And the next slide. Ultraviolet there's a lot of talk about it these days because of COVID. It's a superb way of sterilizing COVID virus. And again, there's talk of using it more and more in public areas, in hospitals, in planes. So it's a very dynamic field currently. And actually, UVB is essential for vitamin D generation synthesis. Okay, so the next slide. So we've just seen how colors are used in light medicine. So you might think that, okay, now we have it. Light medicine has understood the effects of color. And indeed, light medicine is now pursued by thousands of researchers around the planet. It's a very large undertaking, and it's really fascinating to see how quickly it's expanding. You have hundreds of studies coming out every year. You have numerous international conferences on laser medicine. So it's an extremely it rests on very solid scientific ground, the whole field of light medicine now. So it's a wonderful basis for us. Next slide. But is this really all there is to color therapy as we understand it? And in fact, no. And that's really the crux of what I want to talk about here. All these applications of these forms of light therapy that we've just looked at now actually don't depend so much on color. They all talk about specific biomolecular phenomena that are driven by light, and of course that have a certain action spectrum. They will respond to some part of the spectrum more than others. And in that sense, they are dependent on color. But when you apply color to these phenomena, you don't in no way change the quality of them. You just change the intensity of the stimulus for that particular biochemical reaction. whether it's photobiomodulation or melatonin suppression and so on. So this is not what we're talking about when we talk about color therapy or chromotherapy. In chromotherapy, you expect different colors to have different effects. You have qualitatively distinct effects of colors. And usually in chromotherapy systems, you have a balance between these different colors. They all work synergistically to create a whole dimension of healing. So it's very different from, you don't have this polarity phenomenon in regular light medicine, light therapy, as it is understood medically, that you see in the forms of chromotherapy that are being used. And just to illustrate that, we can move on to the next slide. I'm showing you some of the color wheels that are being used in color therapy, in chromotherapy. The most fundamental one is the one created by Dinsha, dating back to the 1920s. So you see here the whole spectrum of colors arranged in the wheel. And already from the time of Dinsha and before and since then, chromotherapists know very well that when you use complementary colors, you have complementary effects. So it's important to see how you arrange these colors and these wheel formations to see where you get complementaries, where if you go across the axis, you get opposite colors and you expect opposing effects from these along these axes. And different color systems will use different types of color wheels. So I'm going to show you a few of them just for your enjoyment. The next slide just shows us dear old Dinsha here and his spectrochrome device from 1925 is really the ancestor of what we're working with today. And of course, Dinsha is an example of how people who worked with this type of thing have been pursued by medicine over most of the 20th century. As you well know, his work was suppressed, and even today, his work is still not legal. Next slide.
Hey, just very quickly, Anadi, isn't it true that Dinsha was actually sent to prison and persecuted for, and all his laboratory research papers, everything was kind of burned by the FDA here in the United States?
Yeah.
I read
he had two court cases, one in the 30s, which he won, and then they succeeded in having another one in I think the 40s or 50s, and this one he lost. And so indeed his whole work was destroyed. His laboratory was destroyed, his papers. I think only one copy survived, which we still have today. And even today, the injunction that was imposed by the FDA on his work remains valid. So his son,
Darius
Dinsha, who's pursuing his father's work, still is severely limited in what he can do legally. So yes, indeed, it's an interesting example. And he's still considered ridiculed. If you look at the web, there's not much respect for his work in the scientific community. And we'll try to understand a bit better why that is in the next minute. Here, I'm just going to show you quickly some of the other color wheels that have existed in history. One of the original ones is from Newton himself in the 1660s. He already had this concept of putting colors together from the rainbow. Next slide. A famous one is the one from Goethe from the 1800s. Again, he started to organize colors and to give them properties and qualities. Next one. Here we have Theo Gimbels, another pioneer in the 70s. His circle was based on 8 different colors. It was an octagon with, again, different qualities and different polarities of colors within that. Next one. A more bonded one is the color wheel, the harmonic chromatic wheel of Pierre Van Obergen, a colleague from the ILA, whom we well know. He again has a different organization, more based on the red, green, and blue to match our visual system. as primary colors. So it just gives you an idea. All these systems have led to different generations of instruments and chromotherapy modalities. Again, I'll just go briefly to a few of them, a few of the most modern ones. One is there's a whole range of instruments based on syntonic optometry, the work of Spittler dating back from the 20s. And you had instruments in the 80s from John Downing. You have our Leona's creation, the photon waves, still being produced today. Next slide. You have different types of color toning systems where you project colors on the skin, like Dinsha was doing. And modern variations of that include the Lumincure system from Pierre Van Obergen. Again, sophisticated computer-driven light generating devices, color generating devices. Next one. You have a whole range of interconnection between colors and acupuncture, traditional Chinese medicine, which have given rise to very sophisticated chromotherapy modalities. For example, color puncture from Peter Mandel is one of the most famous ones. You have chromatotherapy from Dr. Agrappa. Again, these are people whom we've seen at the ILA at various conferences in the past. You have a less known system of photonomedicine by Pierre Magnin, which died just a couple of months ago, and which we've honored at the ILA by giving him the Francis McManaman Award, because his work really deserves to be better known. Again, he was applying colors. One aspect of his work was applying colors on reflex points, mostly on the ear, auriculotherapy, Noget's work. So these are all very sophisticated systems applying colors on the body, on reflex points, meridians, acupuncture points, and so on. Next slide. You have the work of Carl Ryberg, monochrome systems using monochromatic light, very pure, narrow bandwidth sources of light, which have which have the highest potential, both in psychological and biological terms. So again, he's working now on the next generation of the devices. So this is still in full development. Next slide. You have the Sensora, which is my own creation and my own work, using multisensorial stimulation, combining light with sound and kinesthetic transduction. So again, the expression of using modern technology to apply on these properties of colors. Next slide. So you can see this whole range of color instruments are quite distinct from what's happening in mainstream light medicine. And why is that? How can we understand these scientific terms, these various instruments that work with the properties of pure colors and the interplay of different colors? The trouble is that if you try to do it in purely biomolecular terms, as like medicine is doing, you quickly run into problems. I've seen some people are trying, for example, to simply find out different chromophores in the body, light-sensitive proteins, and from those try to understand how all these colors would have an effect on cells. And if you do that, you will never be able to get the full power of what we see in those chromotherapy systems. It just doesn't explain the whole thing at all. And other people I've seen are trying just to decompose these different colors into the red, green, and blue primary components and see the proportions of those. And maybe from that, they could explain the effects of colors. And again, if you do that, you will never see the full potential of the systems that we're talking about. So something else must be at play. And there's a couple of things that we can look into. One is the whole field of energy medicine. Maybe here I think, yeah, next slide, Justin. Yeah, so you can just zoom back here to me. So energy medicine, what is that? It's understanding life in terms of energy fields rather than understanding it in terms of molecules, as medicine is doing. And medicine is starting to go in that direction, but we're really still in the very, very early days of that new type of medicine. And there has been research going on for it for decades. It goes back to quite a while back, and there's been major scientists devoting their life to it. So it's not like it's something that doesn't exist and that's not scientifically valid. The point is just that it's a new science that is still being born. We're still talking about things that are not fully understood, new phenomena of life. So it's not surprising that it cannot fit nicely and easily within the framework of regular medicine and biology. A good reference in terms of energy medicine, if you're interested in the topic, next slide, is of course the work of James Oshman. We've invited many times James at conferences, and his reference book is excellent if you want to understand more what's happening in that field. Complete basis of energy medicine. Next slide. And what he explains is that there is in the body a whole range of connective tissues that are actually liquid crystals, and this whole new research is indicating that you can actually have fields, various types of fields propagating through this whole network within our body. And that opens the door to understand things like these ways of, for example, using light on acupuncture points, because these energetic pathways within the body can conduct energy fields, including light. So it's a whole new way to approach this thing and understand what might be going on. Next slide. And so how would light interact with these networks within the body? Naturally, light is a wave. That's the basic property, and wave means it has frequency. So now we run into the whole field of frequency and vibration interaction and vibration medicine. Next slide. How can we interact with these waves? Well, through resonance, the universal phenomenon of resonance. Whenever you have something vibrating, if you expose it to something vibrating at a similar frequency, they will fall in sync, they will resonate, and there will be an extremely efficient energy transfer when you're at the same frequency. So it's the basis of lots of fundamental phenomena. Next slide. And it's very beautiful to see this at work in cymatics, the works of Hans Jenny, where you kind of visualize how these resonances transform matter. And from few very basic components, few very basic sine waves, frequencies, if you vibrate, in this case, it's a little plate of water, you see extremely complex, exquisite shapes taking form. Next slide, we see it live on video. Some examples of cymatic patterns created by Gary Buchanan, who unfortunately died last year. Again, we had him at the ILA, and he showed us he explored many of these beautiful resonance patterns. Here you see you change frequencies a bit and you create completely different patterns within matter. So this is just to illustrate how simple vibrations can have this deep impact within us in terms of energy fields. Next slide. And of course, you can also talk about modulating light. Light is a perfect medium to apply modulation, to change its intensity or its color at lower frequencies, and then you enter the whole world of vibration healing systems, and there are many going around, many frequency systems that you can explore. Most of them are empirical, not many are based on clear scientific foundations, but they work. So they definitely they are undercovering something that we need to understand better. And there's a whole field of audiovisual stimulation where you use low frequency oscillations to interact with biorhythms such as brainwaves. And in that field has good clinical validation. There's a lot of work and studies going on. So energy medicine, this whole world that has to be understood before the real most deep effects of colors will be revealed. So there is a lot of work still left to be done. And there's a second layer to be understood, and that's the fact that light also works on our mind. It doesn't only work on our body and our energy. And that opens up a whole other range of chromotherapy work. Lots of color therapies work at that level, at the work of interacting with mind, with cognition, and with consciousness. Light is our main sensorial influence through vision, so it's not surprising that it has such a profound effect on cognition. Next. We can see easily our light reaches many different regions of the brain. First, of course, through the optic nerve, going to the visual cortex, and from there diffusing to all other parts of the brain. Next slide. There are others, optic pathways which are significant, the retinotactile, the accessory optic pathways, which again link the retina to other parts of the brain, to the brainstem, to the amygdala, the seat of emotions. And basically, next slide, all areas of the brain are connected to vision and to light. So it's very obvious that light and colors will have a deep impact at many levels on the brain and cognition. And all these pathways I just mentioned, by the way, are fully transmitting color information. They don't simply transmit intensity information like the non-visual optic pathway, the hypothalamic pathway does. They actually transmit the full RGB information of color. So they expose all these regions to the brain to color influences. Next slide. And when we understand how mind has a basic influence over the body through all these modalities that I list here, things like the placebo effect, epigenetics, neuroplasticity, psychoneuroimmunology, all these fields which show how the way in which you think and your mind frame really controls your health and your body. And then again, it's easy to understand how light and colors can start to have this deep influence on health, because light and colors, when we perceive them consciously, have this powerful effect on our mind. So it opens the door to all kinds, a whole range of subjective effects of colors, because each of us will perceive colors in its own way. And this is another area which makes it very difficult to quantify a lot of what chromotherapy does, because a lot of it is subjective. It's very difficult to identify clear-cut effects of colors because they depend on different people. So that's where things like color tests become useful to understand better the color profile, the color receptivity of people, and adapting the way you will use colors on these people. Again, this is falling outside of light medicine as such. But there are beautiful systems like Pierre Van Obergen's color test or the Lucia test, which allow such things. Next slide.
Nadi, we should try to wrap it up in the next 2 minutes so we have time for questions, because there are a few of them coming.
Good to remind that, but that's actually just what's happening is we have a minute left. So beyond that psychological effect of colors, which opens the door to psychotherapy treatments, there's a whole even deeper layer of interaction between light and consciousness itself. And I'm just touching to that to end here. But the deepest influence of colors may be entirely non-material. and related to the nature of consciousness itself. We all know that there is this link between consciousness and light. It's the highest forms of consciousness are called enlightenment. So it's very clear. And last slide. And it's also important to understand that science doesn't know anything about consciousness. You shouldn't be fooled into thinking that it's fallen within the realm of science. Absolutely not. There is a whole field of neuropsychology and science exploring consciousness, but what they are looking into is rather the part that's mind or intelligence or thoughts, processes, but not consciousness itself. Many have still not fully understood the distinction between mind, thought, and consciousness, the substrate into which these thoughts are happening. So it's another layer that is still falling outside of science. So that's it for me. And this is just to show you how we still have quite some way to go before color therapy, chromotherapy can be integrated into a fully scientific framework. Mm. And in a way, it's a good thing because we're touching things that go beyond current science, but that are also rooted in current science. So this is one way to see this. If you want to know more about all these things, of course, I talk about them in my book, Life Therapies. So that's it for the slides, Justin. You can come back to us.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anadi. That was very informative, as always. And the book is available on Amazon, right? Or they have to order it directly from you?
No, they get it from Amazon. I don't sell it.
Okay, fantastic. So it's on Amazon. It's a fantastic book. It's a great gift also for anybody who is in the field and who doesn't have the book. So I would strongly recommend it. I've really enjoyed reading it and learning about how this profession or this focus specialization has evolved. So that brings me to there are a few questions that have come in, and one of them is two more questions. Okay, and another question. So there are a few questions coming in, but we have only 5 minutes. The one question that came in first was. Which is connected to a question I wanted to ask you, which is in the evolutionary steps, for color therapy, what do you foresee? Because as was pointed out by one of the guests, is that the things that have happened to Dinshaw, Tesla, and Wilhelm Reich have the same signature. I remember that I heard Dietrich Klinghardt speak in Vienna, and he says that unless you're on was it him or somebody else who said, if you're not on the quack watch, then you haven't done anything useful. And I just wanted to know, for those of us who are learning from stalwarts like you, what do you think is the future of color therapy? And, how do we mainstream it?
Well, I like a lot James Oshman take on that, where he says that it's just a matter of time before energy medicine takes over. It's the medicine of the 21st century. It is going that way. It's regularly expanding. There's more and more talk about using frequencies, even in medicine itself. So it is happening at its own pace. It's very slow because medicine is an enormous system. It's one of the biggest establishments on the planet. Trillions of dollars at play. It cannot move quickly. So it's kind of natural that it takes its time, but it is happening. The movement is unstoppable. And so I would say for us, while the science is catching up, the best we can do is to try to at least provide clinical validation to what we're doing, even if we cannot explain in fundamental terms how it works. We can at least demonstrate that it does work. And so clinical studies, case studies are really a key to try to bring forward the cause. And I'm working on some clinical studies with the Sensora and Sensosphere. So I think within our possibilities, it's one thing that we can strive for.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that's fantastic. I think that's really, you're right. It's I think what Jim Oshman has said is that it is going to get there. Um, can we be catalysts to speed it up? Is a very good question. And I think what you said about the scientific clinical data to back it up is critical. Then, of course, the big real life question is funding for those kind of
Yeah,
research topics. But I'm
yeah,
sure you're familiar with that. So,
it is indeed. It's not easy. But
so
you have academics more and more who are open, or I mean, light, because of the light medicine renaissance, suddenly is an in topic. Everybody's curious about light, which
yeah,
wasn't the case 10 years ago. So
that's
if you find actually it is easier now to get interest, to get like one study we're doing now in France is with a team of doctors in a hospital. And they are open, they're very open to it.
fantastic. Fantastic. And in fact, our next speaker, Jacob, wrote that benchmark book in, I think it was late 80s, early 90s, Light as the Medicine of the Future. So it's fantastic that he's going to be speaking right after you. And then, interestingly, the next talk, just jumping ahead in 2 weeks, we have two doctors. One is Dr. Larry Wallace, who's going to speak about ocular phototherapy and syntonics. And then we have Dr. Mark Ray from the Lighting Research Center, who's going to speak about circadian rhythms and how blue light impacts it. So it's going to be an interesting dialogue for the next talk as well. But coming back to questions for you, many kudos and accolades coming your way from in the chat. But the two questions. One is in my clinic, it seems most of the children like the green color most, and for grown-ups, they feel a deep calmness by the deep magenta color. Can you explain why? And then the next question, which I would love for you to end with, is how do you perceive consciousness, and where is intuition in this? So maybe the green and the magenta question first, and then close with the last one.
Well, it's an interesting experience that these two colors come up for that person. I don't know if it can be generalized. I mean, if you do lots of color tests, you see quite a big variation. So maybe it's just kind of a coincidence that these clusters that happen there, I don't know. But of course, magenta is part of the balance. They're both balancing colors. So you could expect that people are looking for balance. They don't want the extreme of too low energy with relaxing blue, or too much stress with stimulating red. So you can imagine that's where the resting point, the consensus lies.
Hmm.
And your second question, I couldn't understand.
The question is,
consciousness and intuition. Well, we resolve that in
we
the
don't have too
next
much time. That'll take a few
15
days,
seconds.
but maybe like 60 seconds or less, if you could.
Right. I mean, this is an infinite topic. There's really, but I guess the point I wanted to make is to remain open to the fact that when you work with light and colors, you work, of course, with very physical phenomenon, energies, and it's totally real and physical. But you also work with something that is transcendental, that can connect you with dimensions beyond the mind, dimensions of consciousness, and that lead to breakthroughs for people, deep breakthroughs and openings. So it's always nice to be reminded of those. The full spectrum. Light has so many different modalities and aspects.
Right. Well, thank you for attempting that short answer for a big question, and thank you for all your answers. Really inspiring and evocative. And Anadi, again, I know you're busy, so thank you for your time.
With pleasure. Looking forward to see Jacob now.
Yep. And before we go to Jacob, we have a video message from the ILA president, Thelma van der Werf, and we're going to show that now, and then welcome Jacob right after that. So
great. Yeah, we're very grateful that Thelma is stepped in
Yes, we are all very
Next president.
leadership. Yes.
Welcome to the talk show of the International Light Association. We meet twice a month live on alternate Wednesdays. And if you miss a live event, you can see the recordings of the shows on the ILA YouTube channel. We are excited to present to you experts in the field of light, color, and sound, and how these energies or frequencies can be applied to advance health and well being. In this talk show, you learn interesting facts from experts around the world, and you will not only be able to listen to the presentations and debates, but you will also be able to ask these experts your questions. The ELA invites you to join us on this journey of learning and exploring the vast possibilities to use light, color, and sound for your well being.
Thank you, Thelma. A fantastic message. And yes, it's been, since a new board has come in, it's been very exciting to get everything started. So thank you. And thank you, Anadi, again. And on that note, I would like to welcome Jacob Lieberman. Uh, he's currently in Hawaii at his residence there. Can we add Jacob, Justin? For many of you, Jacob needs no introduction. I had the pleasure of meeting him for the first time in Vienna, where I was blown away by how beautiful of a human being he was. From a personal standpoint, I thought the way he presented his knowledge in his humble, laid back manner uh, just kept ringing bells for me because I really enjoyed not just his content, not just his knowledge, but how he delivered it and his empathy and how much he cared, uh, for the person he was talking to. Since then, I've had the pleasure to host him at different venues, and every time he's been so well received that we can't just help it but invite him every time we do something new. um, you know and he is a well-renowned author of several books. The latest one was Luminous Life, but as I mentioned earlier, he's also the author of the benchmark book called Light as the Medicine of the Future. He's written several other books, Take Off Your Glasses and See, Wisdom from an Empty Mind, just fantastic books for reference and self-improvement. Today, we have invited him to talk about seeing beyond 2020, right? And the audience has sent questions to him before today. It's really going to be him responding to the questions that have come and sharing his thoughts and wisdom with us. Welcome, Jacob. It's good to see you.
Abe, it's wonderful to be here, and I couldn't think of a sweeter, more knowledgeable human being to warm things up than Anadi Martel. So I'm absolutely delighted to be here.
Fantastic.
So many things were mentioned today when Anadi began speaking. He spoke about spending some time in India and investigating the field of meditation. And he sort of began by stating quite clearly that it is in this invisible realm where truth lies,
Mhm.
where that which we haven't come to yet. Interestingly for me, two of my mentors who I had very personal connections with uh, were John Ott and Fritz Holvich, one who was a lay person that brought to the world an understanding that light was critical to every aspect of health. That was John Ott. And Fritz Holwich, who in 1947, the year of my birth, made a statement that the stimulatory and regulatory effect of light on the human body occurs by way of the eyes. And so it was some of his groundbreaking work that described what then became called the retinohypothalamic pathway, or what Anadi spoke of as the non-optic or non-visual pathway that impacts hormones and general physiological balance. Anadi mentioned about the color wheel and the work of Dinshaw and the many iterations of that wheel, from Dinshaw to Gimbel, Newton, Goethe, and so on. It's interesting that when I got introduced to syntonics in the 70s, I discovered something very interesting. Of course, Dinshaw's work I was already aware of, and the color wheel, but the originator of syntonics also had an almost identical color wheel. Harry Riley Spittler and another one of his colleagues, Carl Loeb, also had an almost identical color wheel. The colors had different notations. Some were colors, some were Greek symbols, but they were describing the same thing, Dinshaw via the body, and Spittler via the eyes. The one thing that became very evident to me in the very late 70s, after going through a very difficult period of time in my life, where my life allowed me to directly experience something about the science of life, something that occurs in our everyday existence that is a science that we don't typically look at, which is, how does our life actually work? Because that's a reflection of how everything else is working within us. And so my approach to utilizing different portions of the visible spectrum after the foundation that I received from syntonics was based on what I learned through direct experience about how we resonated with certain parts of our life and didn't resonate to the same degree with others, and how that manifested in our life. And then I found a direct reflection of that in our interactions with what we call color, or different portions of the light spectrum. And I discovered early on that our relationship to the different portions of the light spectrum was a reflection of our relationship with the different portions of the life spectrum. So you could say light is the formless and life is the form, which puts light in a very special light, in that it both has what we think of as a material effect, but also a non-material effect. And this is represented in so many ways that we look at light. If you look at biblically, in the beginning, it says, let there be light. And then it said, God created the sun, moon, and the stars on the fourth day. It speaks to two qualities of light, one which is a quality of creation, and the other one which is something that we experience in our everyday existence. What we know from all of the work that has been done to date about light is that our every physiological function is light dependent. In fact, the Nobel Prize in 2017 on medicine or physiology was won by 3 US scientists that basically discovered the molecular basis by which our cells are continually rebalancing themselves and synchronizing themselves with Mother Nature based on how they are impacted by light, darkness, spectral characteristics throughout the 24-hour cycle. Not just when we awaken and when we go to sleep, but everything else that's going on in between via stimulation from sun by day and through moon and stars by night. So on one level, you look at the impact of light and you say that light is designed to balance us and to bring us into a state of health and wellness. As I said in Light Medicine of the Future, the purpose of light, was to help guide us into a state of oneness with life. In other words, the purpose of light was to awaken us into a state of illumination or enlightenment. And that's essentially what my life's journey has been about and what my work has continually evolved into, both in terms of light and in terms of vision and their inseparability from what we call consciousness. So the question is, what does it mean to see beyond 2020? And what does that title have anything to do with what I just said? I find it interesting that a common expression that we use these days is hindsight is 2020. When we look back after the fact, then we see it clearly. That's another way of saying that we don't see it clearly when it's actually happening. The question is, why is that?
Mm.
And if you look at what's going on in the world right now, from an out of control pandemic to what's occurring within the US and many other countries in terms of a living expression of duality, of one or the other without the middle. And so when you look at what's happening in the world right now and you combine that with the fact that even though science has taken us so far, we still have more people getting sick than we've ever had before. We have more cancer, more heart disease, more diabetes, more obesity, more COVID. So then the question is seeing. It's all about not hindsight being 2020, but it's about our ability to see what's happening right now. And so the question is, how is that related to all of these things? Because I know that light is the medicine, not of the future anymore, of the now. The question is, how can it have that impact versus just an impact of utilizing it for symptomatic relief? And so my journey has really been about that deeper place and wondering why light is referred to as consciousness, while the concept of God is referred to as consciousness, why light is the foundation of quantum mechanics. So it's all about seeing. And in order to see clearly, it's not about doing something. but it's about noticing how our conditioning of doing and seeing through the mind actually obscures truth, the truth that has the potential to set us free and to allow us to live at our maximum potential, both in terms of health, but perhaps even more importantly, in terms of contentment. So, how do we start to access that? Being trained as an optometrist and vision scientist, I was led to believe that we see with our eyes. And so I spent much time studying the anatomy and physiology of the eye. And I realized that if you believe or if you see vision as occurring in the eye, then vision will be restricted by what's happening in the eye. I then learned of something called mind. I remember studying something called Silva mind control in the very early 70s. And they had this statement they made. The mind selects, the brain records, the body enacts. And so I began realizing that the content of the mind was influencing the way we saw. I then had this profound experience in 1976 where my eyesight, after wearing glasses for many years, instantaneously cleared. And it occurred without any changes to the eye. And so here I had a direct experience that the source of the seeing was not the eye. It was involved the eye, but it also involved other things. And at that time, in 1976, I was sure that it was the mind, whatever the mind was. And the way I spoke about it, because I did a 4-year experiment, which I called an experiment on the workings of my mind between 1976 and 1981. And the way I used to speak about it was, if I can just find the right button to press, I could see what actually occurred, and then I could share this with people. Because I knew something had happened that was very, very powerful. And I knew that part of my life's journey was to try to see if I could share this and to make a contribution to humanity. That was part of the reason I left the optometric field in the mid-80s. The discoveries about light, the discoveries about vision, and the discoveries about how to learn without effort. Or maybe what I eventually came to see is how to live with minimal effort. After 44 years of seeing clearly without glasses, and still my eyes, they used to be nearsighted with a significant amount of astigmatism. Now they're farsighted to the same degree with even more astigmatism, but I still see clearly. So my journey has been all about what is the source of the seeing. And Anadi spelled it out so beautifully. We have no sense of what consciousness is. We think of consciousness as the mind, or what we experience as the conscious mind, the ego, local consciousness, if you will. What we experience as mind is like a film strip in a projector. A film tells a story. So when you sit in the movie theater, you look at a screen, it's perfectly white, and then all of a sudden, life is projected on that screen. And with these very large screens, the hemispheric screens they have these days, and the surround sound and the holophonic sound, you're in it. It's reality. And you feel all the impacts of what's happening on the screen. If you look behind you, you see a projector. And that projector is a source of light with a film strip. And so the purity of the light is modified by the context, the content of the film strip. And so that example allowed me to see that the contents of the mind is really a recording of the conditioning throughout humanity. It's really a historical recording, imprint of all the things that have been conditioned, not only into me from the time of my birth, but my mother, my father, their mother, their father, their mothers, their father, who knows how far back. So to attempt to try to figure out, how do I change my mind, is like chasing a dog in a parking lot. You'll never catch that dog because there's no way of knowing what the origin is. Where did that particular idea get put into the quantum soup that I call me? Consciousness is a mystery, but actually it's not so much of a mystery. Consciousness is a mystery like this concept we have of a creative force that we call God. It's a mystery because we say, well, it's out there. It's separate from us. And it sees everything, it knows everything, it's everywhere. But you just can't describe it. You can't see it. And so we've always been led to believe that the creative force, the source of the seeing, is something out there that we have no contact with. And so when we look at consciousness and we say, you know, that's the hard problem, that's the mystery, it then brings me back to what Anadi said in the beginning of his talk about consciousness and meditation. The practice of meditation, when I first was introduced to it in 1971, I thought was about relaxation and so on and so forth. I came to realize that one of the primary discoveries that one makes through the process of meditating is that you discover that there's some aspect of our humanity that is continually noticing what's occurring in this thing called mind. There's something within us that is, I call it the final set of eyes. It's something that has no point of view. It's something that just notices. And it notices everything occurring in the external world, everything that's occurring within the somatic aspect of our being, the body. And it's something that is inseparably aware of what's occurring in this thing we call mind, which we have falsely been told is our mind. Oh, it's my mind. I don't mind it. And so we identify the mind as us. And then we identify the mind as the source of our seeing. But when the mind becomes the source of the seeing, then you see according to the conditioning of the mind. And so you get all these different points of view, opinions. But opinions are not truth. Belief is not truth. Belief is virtual. Belief means the opposite of truth. For a glimpse of truth, an epiphany, a revelation to occur so that one has a direct experience that alters their humanity, perhaps permanently, that occurs when the seeing occurs from its source. And so seeing beyond 2020 and recognizing that we have to go from hindsight being 2020 to putting 2020 in our hindsight, that there is an experience that is occurring continually and an experience that is occurring as foresight that creates present sight to be clear. Because each of our cells is designed to detect and respond to single photons of light, it means that our entire humanity is designed to see without looking. It means that we are designed to see the formless before it is rendered into form. It means that the ability for awareness to precede experience is what allows us to meet each moment as it occurs and to experience the miracle called presence. Presence. For me, it's about noticing that we are the noticers, not the thinkers. The part that is making choices is the part that is unclear. When clarity occurs, there is no choice necessary. It's only when clarity is not there that worry begins to occur, even though we call it thinking, in an attempt to guarantee safety, security, and predictability, even though none of those things occur on this planet. There is an aspect that sees all there is. It's what I attempted to share in a multitude of experiences that occurred for me in the 90s, which created the content of the book Wisdom from an Empty Mind, which is what occurs not from us, but through us in those instances of deep meditation, whether your eyes are closed or your eyes are open, that occur in those instances where for a moment there's a glimpse through the eyes of God. There's something that is so profound that there's no way of explaining it. And so We're at an intersection right now where we realize that whether you are seeking truth through a microscope, a telescope, gold standard, placebo-controlled studies, or whether you are seeking truth through the direct experience of seeing clearly, not through the film of conditioning, those two aspects of truth seeking, whether through the eyes of the scientist or the eyes of the mystic, are actually the same. They're all the same. And that is the most exciting place for me about the field of light and the field of color. And it's in that individual relationship with the different aspects of the light spectrum where magic emerges. Anadi mentioned the word resonance. Most of us know what that means scientifically, but we have ways we speak about this all the time that mean the same thing. Birds of a feather flock together because they're in resonance. People fall in love because they're in resonance. What occurs when this resonance is that unbeknownst to us while we're not looking, we slip from everyday reality into the source of the seeing. We disappear as individuals and become holographic focal points of light. We begin to emanate light. And when resonance occurs, everyday reality disappears. The aches and pains seem to disappear. The concerns about finances, relationships, or anything else in that instance are nowhere to be seen. It's almost like you got taken to a higher floor in a building, and now you see something that you didn't see before, and everything is instantaneously different. Resonance gives us the everyday experience of awakening for little instances, but those little instances are the most powerful instances of our life. And when we can begin falling in love with more of life, then the things that used to feel uncomfortable become more ordinary. The sources of stress, the cause or contributing factor to about 90% of disease, the source of the stress begins to dissipate and move into the background. We become less allergic to life and more in love with life. And so within the process of utilizing color, we can begin to reflect to ourselves the portions of the energetic spectrum, which is the foundation of what the material life comes from. The energetic portion, the energy medicine, if you will. When we begin to experience our relationship with each of the portions of the light spectrum that we perceive as color, we begin to see right there what is easy to embrace and what is not so easy to embrace. And in the process of working with it gently and beautifully and deeply and aesthetically, as Anadi does with his technology, it makes it easy for something within us to say, ah, thank God I'm home, I'm safe. And from that place, something opens up and it literally allows the light to come in, to fill us up with light. It's in that crack where the light seeps through. And so when that opening occurs because we feel safe, that's when the clarity comes in, which is inseparable from the light. That's when we experience truth beyond opinion. And that's where we are transformed from using the light to seeing the light, and then to recognizing that all of us are the light. Thank you very
Beautiful.
much.
Thank you, Jacob. Thank you. We have time for a few questions. And the one question that has come in previously is how can we train our vision to create our future? And if there are other questions from the audience, please feel free to send it directly to me on chat or to everyone on chat. Thank you.
Training our vision is saying, I think I have something to teach to the source of life. For me, spending years in the field of vision training, what some people call vision exercises, doing all kinds of movements with the eyes, they were beneficial. As I began to incorporate aspects of mind, it expanded a bit more. But I realized the glimpses of clarity that people experience at moments where they're not trying to do anything, they just sort of come spontaneously. That occurs because the seeing retreats from the eyes and the mind to the field of awareness, pure awareness that we call consciousness. Consciousness is not an individual phenomenon. It is a field, a background of all that is. It is the ocean from which each of our individualities emerge from. But when the drop falls into that ocean, all there is consciousness. It's not my consciousness. It's not me. There's just something that is noticing. So how do we train vision? From my perspective, training has to do with doing. Doing is a concept we have that I think is actually antithetical to what's actually occurring, because in this universe, everything is occurring effortlessly. The universe defines economy. An economy means your presence is all that is invested and everything comes back to you. And so the real aspect of uncovering vision are those instances where grace has occurred, something stops us in our tracks, the doing stops temporarily, the mind quiets temporarily, and all of a sudden, there's just a field of eyes that are seeing. That's when truth is experienced. And when that occurs, there's no need or there's no thought. There's no impetus for creating the future, because in that moment, what's occurring is there's an aspect of seeing that sees everything that has yet not arrived.
Right.
The reason a bear wakes up the first day of winter when the snow has fallen overnight, and the bear meets winter with total presence rather than waking up and shivering and saying, oh my God, I forgot to get my overcoat at Costco. The reason the bear meets life in each moment is because the change is necessary for that adjustment to occur in each moment has been going on for months. So what's coming up is noticed by ourselves well before it actually occurs in the external world. And our physiology is continually adjusting itself so that it meets life in each moment. When we begin to see those things not as conceptual ideas, but as actuality, when there's a knowing, not a thought about it, then there's no need to make choices. One can live in a state of being choiceless.
Fantastic. Well, we have time for one more question. There are many that are here, but we'll probably have to take that offline. But one question, which is a practical, or at least to me, seems like a practical question. So, how do we start the practice to actually see? Like, do we focus, meditate on something, or is it through some different way? How do we like get into this rhythm of actually seeing? Is there an overt way of doing it, or is it just something that happens with time?
You know, an old friend of mine used to say, it's good to have stepping stones, just don't take the stones with you. We utilize practices because we're led to believe that there is a path, stepping stones. And we go from one to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, and then we arrive. But the state we're speaking about, there's no stepping stones to.
Right.
The awakening occurs as a quantum leap, which essentially means you're in one state and then you're another, and you have no idea how you got there. You speak about, is there something to do? One of the first things that Buddha said after his supposed awakening was, oh my God, there was nothing to do. So the doing, and everybody says, well, can you be more practical? Tell me what to do. What to do is to notice how much doing you're doing. You realize that if you watch a baby, when a baby is hungry, it naturally eats. When it has to urinate, it naturally urinates. Its heart beats by itself. The breathing occurs by itself. The blood pressure regulates itself. The blood sugar regulates itself. Hormones release automatically. If something is touched that is warm, the hand pulls away. If something is needed, the hand goes out and grabs it. What I'm saying is very simple. Everything we think we have to do naturally occurs without doing anything. We receive guidance to look in a certain direction because all living things have a purpose for being. And so there's something within the science of the universe that guides an apple tree to grow and create apples, or a palm tree to create coconuts, or a human being to develop. The tree doesn't have to do anything. It just is. The roadmap is already there. The roadmap for our existence is there. Before the scientist says, "Oh, I had a great discovery today," if you speak to them, you'll find out that somewhere during the night a few months ago, they woke up because a vision came to them. It didn't come from them, it came to them, and it pointed them to look in a certain direction. That's called inspiration. If we notice and are aware of what's happening in our life, we will see that our eyes are continually guiding us where we need to look at next. We don't need to look, we just need to allow seeing to occur. That occurs and is inspiring. When we try to do it, the inspiration is not there. The doing is the result of desperation. It's a lack, it's an inability to see that everything is occurring by itself. And so this process is I think it's just a result of living. That in the process of living and experiencing all the different facets of the gemstone we call life, we have moments of clarity. And then we have more moments of clarity, and then more moments of clarity. And then those moments are guiding us. I'm not sure we ever arrive,
Right.
but we keep seeing more and more, and it becomes more exciting.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Jacob. Unfortunately, because I could spend all afternoon discussing things with you, but that's all the time we have today. There are a few questions that remain unanswered, and for that, I apologize we couldn't get to it. But is it okay for them to contact you via email and ask questions?
Yeah, they can just email through the website at info@jacoblieberman.org.
.org. So info@jacoblieberman.org.
Org. Yeah.
Liberman.
Yeah.
So for those of you whose questions we couldn't get to, my personal apologies. We just ran out of time. And Jacob, thank you. I know you're really busy. And I thank you for taking the time, and thank you for everything that you have done for the ILA over the years as our vice counsel, as our guide, as our north light, if you would. And it's really, I feel very grateful and thankful to all the forces that we know you. Um, so thank you for coming.
Can I say something?
Sure, Jacob.
Yeah.
Yes.
I thank you for thanking me, but I thank all of you
Yeah.
because all of you are pioneers. All of you are looking at things that most people are not looking at.
Mm.
And all of you know that seeing things a little differently is both very exciting and very lonely at times.
Yes.
So to be able to connect with other people who are on the same page, on the same journey, it's what allows us to feel good about living. So I want to thank all of you, and uh, yeah, just thank you so much.
Thank you. So it's a few quick, one more minute. I know we are far over our time limit, but just quick housekeeping notes. Please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and please consider becoming a member of the ILA. It's only €8 per month, and you get access to resources that would impact your professional practice, your personal life in substantial ways. I know that it did for me, and I hope several of you would consider becoming members of the ILA. We would be back in 2 weeks, 2 Wednesdays from today, same time, 12 noon Eastern Time, New York time, with two guests, Dr. Mark Ray of the Lighting Research Center and Dr. Larry Wallace, um, who's going to talk about ocular phototherapy, as I mentioned earlier. That's going to be an exciting, exciting talk. I want to thank the talk show committee, which is myself, Abhay, with Pascal Vidal in Paris, and Lynn Dool in Australia. I believe she's in Adelaide. I also want to thank our channel partners, which is Colornostics, um, Soul Studio LLC, and Aqua Quinta. And lastly, uh, my thanks from the ILA to Justin Mensch of AWA Agora and Anup Kushwaha of Soul Studio LLC. Um, that's all for today. Thank you, all of you, for attending and for supporting us. And we hope to see you again. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you, Anadi. Namaste.